to refer you now to the handout with the musical excerpts. And we're going to do some singing all together. Some of you may have sung in German more than others. Be brave. I'll refer you, because it's German music, I can refer you to what my German undergraduate professor once said. He said, "Ich singe nicht gut, aber laut." I don't sing well, but I sing loud. So feel free to use that philosophy. Musical excerpt number 1. Es ist das Heil uns Kommen, Herr. There's a chorale tune that we're going to learn together right now. We'll all sing it together, and then this will become important to the piece. Here we go. Es ist das Heil uns kommen, Herr, von Gnade und Gnade Güte. Is in the Brahms version of the motet, it starts out looking like this. A very homophonic texture, meaning that all the parts are singing the words at roughly the same time, a lot of block chords. Very much in the manner of a Bach chorale that you would see at the end of a Bach cantata or in movements in the Bach Passions, for example. So what we'll do next is we will actually sing this soprano part. It's the same tune we just did. You can follow on your handout. And we'll sing it along with a recording of a choir singing exactly the same thing. So here we go, same thing. Es ist das Heil uns kommen, Herr, von Gnade und Gnade The second and final section, you'll notice, is a lot more polyphonic. The tenor, es ist das Heil uns kommen, Herr, the alto, es ist das Heil. Very polyphonic, but follow this baritone part. Nothing happening. Until, finally, it comes in with much longer notes, es ist das, with that same chorale tune. So now let's get the experience of what it would be like to be a baritone in this particular choir. And here it comes. And I just have to find the specific spot in the piece. 103. Okay. Got a long way to rest, so I'll give you a good cue when it's time to come in. Alto. Coming up now. And then lots of polyphonic music, and if we're baritones, we'd sit there a while longer waiting for our next entrance. All right? So the point here is that the piece is constructed of 2 sections. First section is a Bach-like chorale. The second section, polyphonic texture where the same tune appears in longer notes. What we'll do now is take a look at a piece that Brahms knew by Bach that shows some very striking similarities to this piece. And to say that it influenced the piece, well, you make the judgment call in just a second. So, going on, take a look at Bach Cantata number 4, Christ lag in Todes, Banden, a piece that Brahms had studied a lot. Perhaps, this is interesting, perhaps to correct the fact that he didn't think he was very good at writing contrapuntal music. He didn't think he was very good at writing in the Baroque style. So, he conducted this piece with his choir in the fall of 1858, 2 years before he wrote Es ist das Heil, by the way, with his choir in Detmold. So first, let's learn the chorale tune together. Here we go. Es war ein Wunder. same way we had Es ist das Heil uns kommen, es ist. Now we have Es war ein wunderlicher Krieg. Soprano enters. Same melodic contour, same rhythmic idea going on. And this time it's the altos who have the boring job of sitting around for a while. And when they finally come in, by the way, it's alto clef here. Es war ein same idea. So now let's experience what it would be like to be altos singing verse 4 of Bach Cantata number 4. And here it is.
You're an alto.
Es war ein wunderlicher Krieg, Todes Krieg. Es war ein wunderlicher Krieg,
Here we go. Possibly influenced the piece that Brahms wrote as well? Okay, very much played an influence. So now the question is, why would Brahms make such an obvious reference to a piece by Bach? And to answer that question, we need to look at the historical context in which this happens. Franz Brendel gave a famous inaugural address in 1859, and it was celebrating the anniversary of the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, the publication that had been founded by Schumann. And here's what Brendel said. He was talking about the music of the future, what he called the new German school. And look at the names he mentions. Wagner, Berlioz, and Liszt. I'll jump over here. Protestant church music up to and including Bach and Handel has long been known as the Old German School. Beethoven, transitional figure into the Romantic period, once more clasps hands with the specifically Germanic North and inaugurates the Neo-German School. So what he's saying is, the followers of Bach and Handel and all of our musical forefathers, so to speak, are Wagner, Berlioz, and Liszt. Whose name is conspicuously missing from that? Brahms. Very good. Brahms, Mendelssohn, Schumann, all of the conservative composers. In the Romantic period, here's what happens. To oversimplify things a little bit, there's the sort of conservative school. Composers like Brahms and Mendelssohn and Schumann who use a lot of Baroque techniques and stick to the principles of classical music with a romantic flair, so to speak. However, there's also Berlioz and Wagner and Liszt who go off in a dramatic new direction, and it really doesn't show as many similarities to the older music. So how do you think Brahms felt about this? To be told that the wave of the future was the music of Berlioz, Liszt, and Wagner. Yeah, he probably wasn't too happy. So here's what he did. He set about to publish a reply in the newspaper. He set about to publish a reply to this, to say, here's what we think. And it was supposed to have a very impressive number of signatures at the bottom. Now, unfortunately, it was published prematurely, and here are the signatures. Not the most impressive number. Brahms, Joseph Joachim, the violinist and composer, and so unfortunately it leaked pretty early, and it was supposed to be revised, and it didn't get a chance to be. But just the same, we can look at the message they were trying to send. The undersigned consider it their duty to protest against such a distortion of the facts and declare that so far as they themselves are concerned, they do not recognize the principles which find expression in Brendel's Zeitschrift and can only deplore or condemn as, here's the key phrase, contrary to the most fundamental essence of music, the productions and leaders of the leaders and disciples of the so-called Neo-German school. So, Brahms and his friends are saying the techniques of Bach and Handel and all those forefathers don't appear in the music of Wagner, Liszt, and Berlioz. And that, in other words, the logical followers of Bach and Handel are, well, Brahms, look what he did. He starts out his motet with a chorale that's screaming, this is like Bach. And what does he do next? He goes to a section where it's polyphonic, and we have that chorale tune in there, very similar to a cantata that Bach had written 2 years earlier. So, by doing this, and there's a lot of writing on this by a gentleman named Daniel Beller McKenna, he says that Es ist das Heil, the Brahms motet, displays compositional techniques that for Brahms would have represented the fundamental or innermost essence of music, as transmitted by Bach, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, the very composers whom Brendel had, in his view, misappropriated as the basis for the style and name of the new German school, the progressive composers. So, I think she agrees. So, what Brahms sets out to do is right away show, yes, I'm following in the footsteps of Bach. But to leave it at that would be oversimplifying it. Because he also did it in a more romantic way. And what I've shown you here are two harmonizations of the ending of the chorale. The one all the way, the one in red there by Bach, is an actual setting that Bach did of the same chorale, and here's what it sounded like. Very simple harmonically. The most dramatic thing is that 5 of 5 chord, that 5, 6 of 5. But now look at what Brahms does to the same thing. A lot of secondary dominant chords, a half diminished 7th chord. Romanticized, okay? It gets even more so when we move on to this chorale motet section. This is what Brahms did. Here is a rewritten version. This is what it might have sounded like if Bach had written it. He didn't actually say this, but if he had, it might have sounded like this. Particular attention to the notes that have little brackets around them, like that G sharp in the tenor part in the second measure, or the C sharp, because we get these sonorities like this. Major ninth, minor second, or this C sharp against the D and the B that the alto sings. Very dissonant, so we get a little bit more romanticized. Romantic. But it goes completely up. Oops, sorry. Uh-oh. Oh, that's a shame. Let's see here. Give me a second. Let's see if we play here at least. All right, at least I can play something for you while we wait for this to start up again. Okay? It goes completely over the edge in, well, you have the translation on your handout. That's a good thing. I made that for a reason. Take a look at the translation now to Es ist das Heil und Kommen, Herr. And in particular, the last line. He has become our intercessor. Ist der Mittler worden. And one of the big things that Daniel Beller McKenna writes about in his article is that here's a quote from him, amid the power struggle over Germany's musical legacy, the most important thing is to recognize the need for a Mittler, a musical Mittler, a musical intercessor, savior. And so maybe it's Brahms, because the whole thing has sounded very Bach-like, and then all of a sudden, at the end of the piece, it sounds like this. Give me a second to find it, and here it is. As soon as we get to the words, ist der Mittler worden, it goes from very Baroque sounding to this. Very romantic, lots of chromaticism. There so that you can see it as I just demonstrate a couple things on the piano. still say please clean filter down there? That's a shame, because I really want you to see the bass part, which apparently is going to be blocked now. But I'll tell you, well, you know what, I'll tell you instead. The bass is holding out a pedal note. So Brahms could just as easily, I'll start in measure 74, he could just as easily have ended like this. And just ended on a 1 chord. But look what the soprano does there. That D natural turns it from a very stable ending to... We can't end like that, can we? No, so he's got to go off in a new direction. Meanwhile, the bass is hammering out this pedal point the whole time as if to say, no matter how crazy it gets, we're still going to come back to E, don't worry. But instead of just going, that is what extends the piece a little bit. Brahms likes to do this. He likes to use that pedal point and change that 1 chord to a 1 dominant 7. He does it in several movements of the Requiem. He does it towards the end of Nenya. He does it a lot of times. So he likes that technique. So here's what happened in this piece, just to summarize it and bring some closure to this first motet. He starts out with a Bach chorale, which says, yes, we're following in the footsteps of Bach. Makes it a little more romantic. He then goes to a chorale motet section directly modeled after a Bach piece. And then when he gets to the part where he's talking about a musical savior in a way, it sounds like Brahms all of a sudden. As if to say, yes, I'm following in the footsteps of Bach, but I'm still me. I'm still going off in my own direction. So, now that we've experienced that motet together, the second one that we're going to deal with in depth, we're going